you sexy beast, and welcome back to War Thunder. As I promised you yesterday, today we're going to take a look at the second Operation S.U.M.M.E.R reward vehicle, the Type 65AA. Now before we go into the history or the stats, I do want to give the proper disclaimers. This is an early look. You aren't really supposed to be able to see this just yet, and chances are the model is not completely finalized, so any bugs you see, any statistics you see, take it with a grain of salt. Chances are it's going to be changed before the vehicle is officially released to the masses. That being said, let's talk about the vehicle. Now, the history is a little bit confusing, namely in the naming scheme. I've had some issues actually finding history on this tank, given that there are two different designations, it seems, for the same tank. One is the Type 63, one is the Type 65. Most of the information I found was on the Type 63 anti-aircraft gun. Although I have found one site that does mention Type 65, although it mentions that the gun is the Type 63. Meanwhile, in other sites I found that the gun is the Type 65 and the tank is the Type 58. It's very confusing, so I'm just going to try and piece together the information from what I have. The Type 65 was the first Chinese SPAA vehicle. It was developed from the Type 58, which in itself was developed from the Russian T-34/85. The major change was a turretless configuration, with a steel platform secured by 27 bolts to the hull, above the turret ring, where a twin Type 63 dual 37mm gun was fitted. This platform was protected by a lightly armored squared enclosure around, acting as a turret, but not really providing that much in terms of protection. The platform itself could traverse fully, held by a gearbox, although the gun elevation was handled by a hand crank, which spanned from 5 degrees to 85 degrees. This meant that target acquisition speed was rather limited, and as such the vehicle wasn't really liked as an AA vehicle, it wasn't all that effective. There was also a large metal ammunition storage container fastened to the side. Obviously, being in an open-top vehicle, the crew was rather vulnerable, and given that the gun elevation was hand-cranked, it was also not very useful as an AA vehicle. That being said, it did see some effective use in ground-to-ground combat. The Type 63/65 was supplied to the North Vietnamese army by China during the Vietnam War. The NVA used it extensively in the Vietnam War, but only a small number were available due to the lack of adequate anti-aircraft equipment. It remained in service with the post-war People's Army of Vietnam, as well as the People's Liberation Army, until the late 1980s. History lesson done? What is this thing like in the game? Well, first things first, this thing is absolutely huge. As in, it is tall. Very tall. If you measure the height from the ground to the top of the crew's heads, this thing is almost as tall as a mouse. As such, stealth isn't really going to be an option with this tank. Now, the chassis itself is based on the T-34/85, as such you can expect the same armor values, the same type of engine, the same type of overall handling characteristics, nothing really too worth talking about. One thing I do have to mention is that the tank does not have a bow machine gun, and in fact it doesn't have any machine guns at all. The twin 37mm cannons are all that you get. Now, as expected, this thing isn't exactly the best AA vehicle out there. The turret traverse isn't really fast enough to keep up with low, fast-flying aircraft, as well as the gun elevation being hand-cranked, which makes target acquisition that much harder. And whilst you do have twin 37mm cannons, they don't quite have the volume of fire needed to be effective in the anti-aircraft role. That being said, this tank is kind of similar to another tank that was infamous a couple of months ago for being quite the tank destroyer. This tank, of course, as you can guess by the title, being the ZSU-57-2. And in fact it does fill kind of a similar role. The Type 65AA has 4 ammo belts at its disposal. The first belt is a 50-50 mix of solid armor piercing and high explosive fragmentation incendiary tracer shells. The second belt is a 100% solid AP shell. The third belt is a 100% high explosive fragmentation incendiary tracer belt. And finally, the fourth belt is an APCR belt. A pure 100% APCR belt. Now, I do not have the stats on the high explosive fragmentation incendiary tracer round. You will have to kind of just guess what the performance will be like, given it's a 37mm shell. Should be something probably similar to the MiG-15's guns, for example. Won't quite one-shot every single aircraft, but it will do substantial damage. However, I do have the penetration values of the other types of shell. The solid AP shell has 60mm of penetration at 0 meters distance, trickling down to about 33mm at 1 kilometer. This shell can be used against quite a number of tanks, if not frontally. you will have to flank around to the sides and get actually pretty damn close in order to use the shell effectively. Also keep in mind that this is a solid AP shell. This does not get an APHE filler like the ZSU-57 does. As such, after penetrating it won't have the same effects, and you will have to aim for different sections of the tank to take them effectively down. The APCR shell is a little bit more interesting. This shell has 102mm of penetration at close ranges, trickling down to 59mm at 1 km distance. Now this APCR shell is what's going to make or break this tank in tank-to-tank combat. 102mm is just about enough to deal with most of the German opposition that you're going to face at this tier, at least at closer ranges. Things like the Panzer IVs, the latest Panzer IVs, which have 80mm of hull armor, as well as in some cases Tiger 1s if you can get very close and very flat onto the armor. It's going to be pretty much a gamble whether your shots are going to penetrate the Tiger 1 from the front or not. That being said, you can use the shell to aim for weak spots. Things like optics, driver optics, gunner optics, and even turret rings can be penetrated by this shell. Now the problem with APCR gels in this game in general is the absolutely horrible performance against angled armor. In fact, the performance against angled armor is so appallingly bad, you cannot even penetrate the hull of other T-34s from the front. Or even from the sides, really. You might be able from the sides since the angle is a little bit less. But from the front, forget it. You will have to aim for perfectly flat surfaces with the shell if you want to be able to penetrate anything. Now the rumored battle rating for this tank is going to be 5.3, which is a little bit high in my own opinion. That being said, I did put it up against some of the tanks that it might be facing in this test map, as you can see by the footage and the background. And I found that you can deal with most targets if you are very close and if you know what you're doing. Things like the Tiger 1 will be massive problems to you. You will have to aim for weak spots or pray that your shell will go through the frontal plate, which in a realistic battle scenario is not going to happen since the enemy Tiger is probably going to be at some kind of distance. He's going to angle his hull, and you're going to have a very bad time. Panzer IVs are slightly easier to take down. The 80mm of hull armor might prove to be troublesome if they are angling their hull, however you should not have much of a problem to go through the turret front. Panthers can also only be dealt with on the turret, and even then the gun mantle is only penetrable through small weak spots like machine gun ports or optic ports. The hull is, frontally at least, completely impenetrable by this gun. From the sides, of course, you're going to have a slightly easier time. You can penetrate Panthers, you can penetrate Tigers, and you can even penetrate Tiger 2s. The only Tiger 2, of course, you're going to face is the Tiger 2 Porsche variant, but it's still worth noting. Now, this tank has a couple of benefits to its survivability. Despite being in an A tank, it is mounted on a medium tank chassis, and as such it does not suffer from hull breaks, which is great. It also has a stunning 6-man crew, meaning that you are not really going to get one-shot all that often, unless you're getting hit by a high-caliber APHE shell. As such, and especially against the British, you might have a very good fighting chance, surviving the first shots and just disabling their guns, their tracks, their tanks in general with your return fast automatic fire. Now, given that this tank has 2 guns and the ZSU-57 has the same system, I am going to presume that this tank has 2 gunners, but I'm not 100% sure on that, since I cannot check it out in the hangar. But if I am right, this means that you can lose 1 gunner and still be able to fire 1 of the guns, which is great. Now, one of the major problems with the Type 65 is going to be its ammunition load. It really doesn't carry a lot of ammo. Each belt represents a 5-round clip. You're going to use 2 belts every time you reload both of the guns, and this gives you a total of only 130 rounds. This means that you aren't really going to be able to play entire matches without having to rearm at a capture zone. You cannot go through the lone wolf style, which is kind of needed in order to flank with the swing, in order to take down tanks effectively. Although on the other hand, given that this tank is an SPAA and will be classified as an SPAA in the battle, unless guided artificially inflated spawn points costs like it did with the ZSU-57, then you have a pretty cheap, if not slightly crappy tank destroyer at your hands. This is definitely a very interesting vehicle and definitely something that is collectible, being one of the few Chinese tanks we have in the game. In fact, I think, if I am not mistaken, although I might be mistaken here, the only other Chinese tank we have in the game is the Type 62, which was also an event tank. Although seeing how many unique Chinese tanks the Chinese War Thunder client has, we might see more popping up like these in the events. I know many people have been hoping for the Type 59, which didn't come, but it might yet come. We'll see. Anyways, lads, hopefully you have a general idea now of what you are grinding for. The Operation S.U.M.M.E.R event has in fact started yesterday, just after I uploaded the video. Good timing, Gaijin. If you want to learn more about how to complete those tasks, I'll leave a link in the description down below, linking to the news posts. There all the conditions and terms will be applied. I really do not think it's worth doing a dedicated video on how to actually complete those tasks, but if you guys have any questions, just feel free to post them in the comments down below and someone will help you. Now, as for myself, I am going to take a couple days of a break. By the time this video uploads, we should have reached 35,000 subscribers, which, by the way, I'm very, very thankful for. We're seeing quite a bit of a growth lately, which is awesome. It's really awesome when the YouTube algorithm finally picks you up again. But I'm going to take a couple of days to work on a follow-up video to the CAS rant I did a couple of days ago. I really want to make sure that I cover all of my bases and make all of my points as well explained as possible, as well as I've mentioned before, kind of exposing the whole problem. The CAS spam is really just a symptom of a bigger problem, which I'm going to talk about in that video. So, don't expect any videos on Warframe for the next couple of days. I might do a DCS video in between, since I do have that recorded, but it's going to take a couple of days for me to perfect this video. Anyways, lads, hopefully you have enjoyed this video. If you stick around this far, thank you very much for watching it. And as always, my name is MikeGoesBoom, and thanks for watching.
Take a deeper breath and give it time. You can walk the path among the lines with your shattered frame of mind. Or instead you could always stay. We can wait right here and play until somehow you can find